So our next group or our next conversation is going to be a CISO, higher education CISO roundtable. We have Barrett Adams, Associate CISO at Oregon Health and Sciences University. And we have David McMorries, Associate Vice Provost, right? Assistant Vice Provost and CISO at Oregon State University, and myself, José Domínguez. We're going to have a candid conversation about some of the challenges that we normally see in higher education. So if you please help me bring Andrew to bring the CISOs to the stage, please. Thank you, Barrett.
Yep, I'm on.
Okay. It's going to be a little interesting. It's me, it's not you guys. So what we have prepared today is just a set of questions that CISOs normally see, the things that we need to consider. And I'm just going to read the questions, and we're going to go around and provide some answers that apply to our institutions. And at the end, if we have time, we'll just go ahead and open the mics for any questions that anybody might have. But as I mentioned earlier, we're running a little late, so we're going to try to catch up during this session. So to start with, how do you manage the rise of cyber phishing attacks when compared to other threats that we have at our universities, when you take into account that we do have limited resources, right? And based on that, what are 2 or 3 things that you would recommend to others to use that are under similar circumstances? And we can start with David.
Excellent. Yep. It's me, Barrett. Well, so phishing is, as everyone knows here, is the most common and easiest way for attackers to get to our people, for sure. And unfortunately, we see at Oregon State University, our students in particular are especially vulnerable. In fact, just this last week, we had an attack where someone was impersonating our dean of the College of Engineering and was sending out employment, opportunities, which obviously was very attractive to a bunch of students. And we had one person lose $2,500 as a result of this. So it's a real, true, and impactful threat. OSU did make some investments recently in some upgraded licensing in Microsoft, and this helps the staff in particular. We have much better tooling to detect and respond to phishes that are received. Unfortunately, currently our students are in Gmail, and we do have some tools in there, but they're not the same as what we have in Microsoft. So I'd say that for us, a clever use of our technology is probably the thing that we can do. But what we can do for our constituency is give them awareness and training. So just yesterday, we had a booth out on the Student Experience Plaza, beautiful day. We even got Benny Beaver to show up, so that was fantastic. And what we had was a bunch of real phishes that were printed out on cards that we put out on the table so students could come and see, what do you see? Are these phishes? And it was interesting, how much uncertainty they had about, what was a true phish, what was a real email. And I think giving students an opportunity to be able to have some awareness of what the threat looks like is probably the easiest thing you can do, particularly in a resource-constrained environment. And of course, using the technologies that you have to support defending your folks is the things that I'd recommend.
And to add to that, I would add user participation in phishing defense. Phishing emails annoy your users, so if you give them a quick avenue to report that email, especially if the reporter product removes the email from their mailbox, you will find they will report quickly. And if you have a phishing email that is sent to a number of your users, they report it quickly, you can tell very quickly that you have an attack on your hands. It's usually, at OHSU, the first sign is the user reporting on that behalf.
Oh, thank you, Barrett. So the University of Oregon, we also make use of the technologies that we have. One of the things that we did early on is that we understood that technology can only get us so far. We can't remove many email messages, but there are messages that go through because they are very difficult to spot. We also have the challenge of the insider email threat, which, accounts that get compromised and then the messages come through a different path where some of our tools might not have visibility. So one of the things that we did early on is we created a fish tank. And the fish tank is basically a website where our CSOC keeps updating it and put it in there. Any phishing messages that we see or report, we throw it in there, as well as some of the valid messages that our institution sends. That's one of the challenges that we have is our official messages tend to look a little bit like the phishing messages that we are getting today. So the threat actors have figured that out. It's like, oh, yeah, I can do exactly the same thing. So it represents a little bit of a challenge for us, but that part has helped. Education, as you mentioned, is another thing that we are trying to do is outreach to our students. Today, if you go out, there's the street fair put together by the Associated Students of the University of Oregon. And we took the opportunity, and the Information Security Office has a little booth in there where we try to attract our students and talk to them about it. So, very good. So continuing going and staying with the phishing threat, do we see it solely as a user issue? What are technical tools that we can use or that people can use to mitigate those? And are there solutions that you would recommend? Something that you really like, that you see that works for you?
Well, with appropriate finances, a good email security tool works. But if you don't have the level of finances that some of our private companies have, what we found is the phishing attacks will show up regardless of what kind of email security you have. The ability to pull them quickly, time matters, and we have a very quick technology now, but before that we just had a PowerShell script. And you would look for messages of the same subject, some kind of common factor, and we could pull those messages quickly. It was something that anybody could do with zero cost. Now, with the low cost, you may have an occasional mistake, but that's just, the organization just has to live with that risk sometimes.
That's an outstanding answer, and I think that I'd also like to reference back what Barrett mentioned earlier about reporting. That's something that's a low, very easy to do. We recently shifted from an email-based one where we asked folks who found a fish to grab it as an attachment, forward it to the Phishing at Oregon State. And Andrew, who was one of the winning team members here, was an alumni of the OSU SOC, and servicing that queue was drudgery for them. We have some better tools now in Microsoft that allows much more automated process. The other thing you can do, of course, is try to make legitimate emails look as legitimate as possible by formatting the official email to some standard that people can expect and whatnot. Of course, this can be used against you, but it does give a little bit of a hint. And then even as simple as putting a banner on things that are coming from outside. A really clever adversary will defeat that, but we've also seen that most of the phishing adversaries are not too terribly clever. They're just persistent. And if you're persistent and you can get like a 5% click rate or 2% click rate, if you're sending out 1,000 emails, I mean, you're going to get success. So there are a few easy things that you can do that are low cost. Encourage people to report, put some marking on the emails, and then of course training and awareness consistently.
Perfect. Yeah, that's one of the things that user training is very important. It's something that we do spend quite a bit of time. We also do encourage, I made it super simple. We had our phishing at uoregon.edu that we encourage individuals to send us the messages so that we can process them and get them into the fish tank. But as we continue to mature our solutions, we got into something that allows us to add a button to our email client. That meant we're standardizing on our email client to help us fight phishing attacks. We also then take that information and the same, we're still using the fish tank because it's something that we have shown that our community does use to validate some of those. And we introduce what we call response. It's you have to respond. And the fact, initially, some of our solutions tended to be about DNS blocking some URL or where you're going. That only works if you happen to be using a system that is connected to campus, right? We all are using our cell phones. We might be on the campus network, but we might not be, which means that our solutions didn't work there. So what we started doing, we have a product that does a threat response auto pull. Basically, if we deem a message malicious, it just goes out and traverses everybody's inbox, mailbox, and just remove that message and puts it in a place that is not accessible to the user, but it's still there in the event that we do make a mistake. But so far, we have not. So the tool seems to be very effective at what it does. And we're looking at those kind of solutions too. So, as you continue to look at phishing, have any of you introduced that concept of self-phishing? And how easy or how hard is that concept within our institutions?
I'll jump on that first. So it's interesting. So there's a challenge in higher ed. Higher ed is a community built on trust, and people who are faculty and are experts don't like to feel like they're being tricked. So it's a challenge. So there's a culture thing. But at OSU, we recently did using some of the tools that we have available to us, did a phish of our IT pros because of course staff is different. And we learned quite a lot about that. So there's some refining that we need to do. For us, it feels like if we were able to provide additional training to the IT community, of course that protects and provides resilience to the network, because clearly the type of attacks you'd have on an IT professional generally is about trying to get access to something. Normally, the type of phishes that we see general user is some sort of scam, almost always financial in nature. So for us, Jose, we have done it. It's going to be a very tricky matter to figure out how to do that more broadly. I think some people are in support of it, and then there's a vocal, not insignificant minority who are very against it. So we have to balance the benefit versus the reward. The good news is, every day we get phished. So every day our communities are getting trained at some level, even though it's not a test. So we also have to figure out how to provide better reporting on what we receive so we can give data-informed advice to our leadership about what the right approach is on doing phishing attacks, self-phishing attacks.
So at OHSU, we've been running phishing simulations since 2017. We're a HIPAA-covered entity, and it's actually a requirement for a lot of insurance carriers to run such a program. We had a phish earlier this year that some people felt a little too tricked, so we're at a pause right now as we expand our approval process for the phishing emails, and I'm confident we'll be back in January. But my advice would be, if you hire a company to help you run your phishing program, stick to the company-provided phishes that they have. You may think they're corny, you may think they won't work training the users, but they have been through a lot more approvals than you could do at your own organization.
I know what you mean. So the University of Oregon, that process of doing self-phishing is an interesting concept in education, right? So our purpose is to educate. We also test, we do trains, but when a professor is teaching, one of the methodologies that they use to evaluate the performance of the student is a test. So what we start seeing is that it becomes very challenging in some respects because there is that sense of you are trying to trick me into doing something and it's going to be bad, right? So what the result is, it's going to be something detrimental to my position or my status or my affiliation with the institution. And what we spent a lot of time doing was really remove all those different points from consideration with the community. So before we even did our first self-phishing campaign, we went ahead and talked to our faculty senate. We talked to our university senior leadership. We came up with an understanding of what we were trying to do, and we also needed to find a tool that would allow us to do what we were trying to do. Because when you look about phishing, the whole concept, what you're trying to do is really change the way that people think. It's like stop, read, think, right? And then you act in the end. And then what we noticed was that many times our users, our brain is at times a little lazy. So like if you receive something from @uoregon.edu.in, you actually stop at the uoregon part. Some people will go to the edu, but right there, this is from the University of Oregon. The IN tends to be totally missed. And this is when it's visible. Other times, our users don't even to see that. We are doing now phishing campaigns on a quarterly basis. We started with a baseline just to have an idea of where we were. That baseline went to every employee. All senior staff and supervisors were informed that the campaign, so we don't do the campaigns without letting people know that they're happening. So everybody was informed. The staff wasn't necessarily depending on the groups. We want to really get an idea of what do things look like right now, so under a normal circumstance. And then we started then doing quarterly campaigns. What we're trying to do is if you pass or you don't fall for the campaign, we're not going to fish you right away on the next campaign. We'll give you a break, right? So, but even when you miss or fail that campaign, we just tell you or provide you with information that will help you and point you as to why that was a message that you could have paid a little bit more attention, and make some recommendations about things that can help them just identify messages a little easier. So, okay. So, of course, not everything is about phishing, even though it seems like that's where we spend a lot of our time nowadays. But besides phishing, I mean, what other types of attacks have you noticed, at your institutions that help with that bring ransomware into our organizations? Are there any other things you've seen?
We've seen twice in the past year, a member of our organization try to download a very common program. Once it was Dropbox, the other was Zoom, and they search for the installer, and there's always something on top that's not the real one. It's either an ad and they have downloaded a fake installer, and that fake installer has been a remote access Trojan. Now it also installs the program that you're looking to install, so you get Dropbox and you think you're fine, but it also has a Trojan underneath. In both of these situations, the user was a local administrator, so it completely took over their computer, but was not able to go east or west, thankfully. But we've noticed that twice in the year, and both times, the first thing that program, the malware did, was deactivate the AV, and it was successful. And both times it was the Microsoft Defender. They're programmed to kill the defenses first.
Yep, we've seen some occasions where probably the worst case wasn't too terribly bad. There was a researcher who was doing some proprietary work, very interesting work, lots of data, unique data, and a ransomware got onto their network access storage, which was really local, and locked everything up. And of course, the value of that data was very high to him personally. It wasn't like institutional level things. It wasn't, Fortunately, this person had backed up and backed up and backed up. I think he had a backup of the NAS. He had original data on the instrument that he was using to do the work. He had some stuff that he had at his home, which caused another conversation, of course. But he was able to recover from that. Recently, we did have a pretty scary event about 18 months ago where we had something that looked like ransomware. Fortunately, it was contained pretty, without too much damage, but it did cause us to do some additional investments in our capability. And since then, we've had pretty good luck with, we use Defender also, where we see defeat of ransomware coming in, several times a week, something will get headed off. So our capability is really dependent on having the right technical defenses in the right place at the right time, but also letting people be aware of what the practices are. We're actually in the process of trying to limit local admin permissions currently. Tony's right here. He knows that this is kind of controversial at the higher education campus, but it looks like we're going to actually get it done. And that may help with the standard user doing what Barrett just said. So we're on a journey of awareness and training to understand why people need to change their practice. It's not because you're a bad person, it's because there are bad people who are getting very clever. And so that sort of message does resonate in higher ed because you didn't ask to be attacked. This is something that somebody did to you. So this is how do we protect you? How do we provide resilience for you? How do we ensure that you can continue your mission?
Yeah, definitely. So that's something that really resonates. Ransomware can be delivered on many different types of payloads. We should all by now understand that there is not a silver bullet for threats. We need to really look at defense in depth, layered security, many components that you throw at it. So you use your firewalls to do next generation analysis of packets, if that is possible within your institution. Like, we're talking about higher ed, and the way that I look at it is that we are running 3 different business units within the same organization. We have what I like to call the easier component, which is the administrative, the business, the part that runs the university. That's the stuff that should look alike. The systems are standardized, your processes are standardized, your systems are managed, your systems, you might not need local admin access because that's something that's controlled. You have a process. Where we start getting more challenges is as we depart from that business unit, that part of our business, and go into the academics. Now things are a little different. The colleges tend to be a little different. They like to see or use different technology for different things. And what we're doing centrally might not necessarily apply everywhere. And if you take that even a step further and go to the research, which is one of the big parts of our universities is research, that gets very challenging because a computer is not a computer, is an instrument. And as an instrument, the processes that you would normally use tend to be a little different. You don't just go ahead and update to the latest version of Windows or whatever software you need to update because you have the potential of affecting what that device was doing. So it requires a little bit more negotiation and and I think that's what will make us successful is understanding that part, right? It's that, and work with those groups that will help you and our advocates. Like I like to, as I told you earlier, I like to work with the faculty senate. So if I can get members of the faculty senate to support some of our ideas, that kind of start helping in that area. We're also counting on federal regulations. When we're doing research, we do a lot of grants, right? So we go and ask for money from the federal government. Well, the federal government is starting to put some requirements on that money that they're providing the universities. And so we're taking advantage of that and trying to find different areas where we can help push controls that will help against ransomware a little easier. So give me a second here. I didn't get my really colorful notes this time, so I'm going electronic. I'll have to say that I love the cards a lot easier. This is kind of tiny. So we're talking about phishing. We're talking about ransomware. We talked a little bit about our users. How do you deal with awareness training? Are we training all of our community? What do we see out there? Who is willing to be trained? Who has a harder time accepting training? And is it a requirement?
Yes.
Yes. At OHSU, it's required for HIPAA compliance to provide annual security training. So we have a staff that is solely, they're dedicated to security training at OHSU, and they provide a computer-based training module that every employee has to go through and complete once a year. It doesn't mean we're 100%. We have some folks that are hard to track down. Either they don't work at the university full-time, and they may not log in at a certain point to take the training, but we get as close as we can.
And OSU is similar. We recently updated our critical training program, and we've done something similar where now there's HR action that's going to be taken for folks who are not compliant. But I would like to put a pitch in for the CISA folks back there. We had CISA come out, speaking of communities hard to train, our executive leadership, our senior leaders. They're very busy, and they're hard to get into a room to talk about things. A year ago, October, so a year ago about this time, CISA, Teresa Massey back there, arranged for us to get a team to come out and run an exercise for our executive leadership. So the provost, the number 2 person on campus, and the immediate response team. So the most senior leaders on campus who would deal with something like a ransomware attack. And the training was fascinating because they had not really considered what would be the scenario involved in a ransomware attack, which, makes sense. Why would you bother executives if it wasn't a big deal? And they realized they hadn't thought about it. And it was really powerful. CISA was able to come back in September. We had another round of training more for our IT directors, which was a follow-on from that. And we have the awareness training for certain communities of folks. So we have a small student health center, for example, that we provide HIPAA training to also. But in general, I think the biggest thing that I would take away is that don't be afraid to engage your leaders, because they're starting to become aware that this is a problem, and you might find them open to getting some training to at least think about things.
So on that note, we received a request from our president, Dr. Danny Jacobs, about providing a ransomware tabletop for the executive team. So they all got together like they would if the campus was infected with ransomware, and it came down to a scenario and a decision whether or not to pay the ransom. And so if you get your senior leaders in that, like, how bad could it be scenario and decision making, it helps their thought if we ever get down to that situation, but it also helps their thinking, okay, we want to avoid this situation.
Yeah, no, this is all great. That is one of the things one of my next questions was going to be about involving your senior leadership. So this is a perfect segue. And that is one of the things that you want to make sure as you're planning your cybersecurity awareness programs, is make sure that you start with your leadership, with your senior leadership. They are your support. They are the ones that are going to help you through that whole process of, if the president has time to fill out or do this, I should be able to do that. So we always see each other, each ourselves and others, and compare our time. So it's a good strategy to just make sure that they're aware. And as you said, if you have a tabletop exercise about ransomware, it's like, does anybody know here where you can go and buy some Bitcoin if you need to pay? I did that exercise, and I found an ATM here in Eugene. It's like, oh, this is perfect. So if it ever happens, I know where to go.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think we have any Corvallis. So
Okay,
we'll
well,
draw it
we'll
down
get
here.
you where it is.
Thank you.
But yeah, so those are things that you need to think about. And will you pay? You know, what are you doing beyond paying? That's one of the things when you're thinking about ransomware. Are you all looking at your IT disaster recovery components for, you know, survive a ransomware attack? What are things that you guys are doing?
So we have a DR program, and every application that we support within IT has a contingency plan should there be a disaster. Part of the main thing is prioritizing your applications. Which application, which system needs to come up first, second, third, in that order. What's your time frame? It all needs to be defined and eventually practiced.
And at OSU, our current CIO, Andrea Ballinger, is challenging the institution to think about resiliency, not the least of which is like earthquake. So it's also physical redundancy, not just what happens on a ransomware. But recently, we moved Banner, which was our on-prem ERP, to the cloud, and predominantly is for that reason. Tony Brock's sitting here with I guess apparently his legs are cold, so it's a little chilly in here. But he, last December, we moved it up into a cloud environment, and it went surprisingly smooth. And in, I think it was February, we did a failover, and we were able to restore, or prove that we could restore Banner within a few hours, where before on-prem it was a tape-based process, which would have taken a while. And I don't think I think we practiced it maybe once, maybe a few years ago, but I don't know that anybody can say how long it would take, but now we know 2 hours we can get our key system back. And to Barrett's point, we're going to need to do a little bit more attention on what are the additional systems that require that same level of availability and ability to get recovered, and we're on that journey now.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. So the University of Oregon, we have a superb incident management team and at our safety and risk services department. And they have done some amazing work at building a business continuity plan. We got to exercise some of that during COVID. Most of us needed to figure out how we were going to continue to operate. Some of the things that we started appreciating as we look at the BCP is that many units say this is an IT responsibility, so they rely on IT to satisfy their business continuity plan. And what we're starting to find out is that at times there seems to be a disconnect between what the units might be thinking we're doing and what we're actually doing. So one of the things that we did this year for FY23 is that we have started, got funding to get a staff to build an ITDR plan for the university. Their job is exactly what you're saying, is identified the requirements from the different business units, the applications, what need to come first. Are we testing? Are we deploying it in such a manner that will satisfy those requirements? Yeah, you're backing up, but you also said that you cannot be down for 2 hours. Your backup takes 4 hours, so something there doesn't work, right? So you need to come back and analyze that. Do we deploy the application differently? Do we be more realistic as to what it takes? So those are things that we're really considering, and we're looking forward to what that program is going to bring to make us more resilient. And I know that we're pretty much, I'm trying to get us back in time, so we have about 3 minutes for questions. If anybody has questions for any of us, please come to the front.
I think you just made Cinnamon Albin back there smile because, you know, business impact analysis, right, Cinnamon? There you go.
Hi, I'm Fred Rankin, the Director of Cybersecurity Infrastructure and End User Services at Lane Community College. And you were talking about admin rights on machines. Now, a lot of the cybersecurity insurances are requiring that admin rights be removed from end user machines and privileged users only. How are you guys addressing that? Because that is something I'm battling.
Exactly. At OSU, what we put out a privileged access rule. Essentially, it's a policy that talks about the requirements. So in general, the policy says that it's prohibited unless there's an exception. And the exception has to be related to business need. You heard Jose talk a little bit about like scientific instruments. There's just no escaping the fact that some researchers are going to need local admin. It's unavoidable. So what you do is you manage it, and I think that what you do is you have to put in compensating controls. For example, we're looking at putting a system that just elevates the local admin for a short time and then de-escalates it. So no one has to use their normal admin account, and it's always at a local admin permission. You have to request it to be elevated. You get it for, you know, half an hour, and it's de-escalated automatically. So that's our strategy.
So at a higher risk is the people that have local admin for every workstation or more than one. And so we tackled that first. There was a lot of people who didn't need it for their job role, and we removed that. Everybody else was forced to get a second account that is that overall local admin. Now from the specific one person per machine, the first thing we did is we made it against policy. So immediately put in a policy that you will not be given local admin as a default. It's by request exception only. And knowing that we have a lot of exceptions out there that we have to now clean up. And so worst case, it's by attrition. But I think before attrition takes over, I think there will be a bigger push. And part of that is allowing, so we have a software catalog, trying to beef up that software catalog. Even if we don't support the software, we'll host it there because you don't need local admin to install it. And so what we're trying to do is eliminate the need for local admin first. That's our kind of strategy.
Yeah, and pretty much so the same initiatives as you all have, endpoint device management to help with that. Make sure that if you do need the access, it's hard to say no, you cannot have it, but you only need it for a certain amount of time. So it will be granted to you for that amount, and then you come back. And again, education, trying to provide examples as to what the challenges are, demonstrate, build a scorecard of challenges that the different departments are doing, build exceptions to keep track of later. So those are things to keep in mind. And
Do you have time or not?
we just right at time, Harvey.
No, I'm gonna let you go then.
Okay, sorry about that. But so I'm really trying to just get us, we're gonna pivot right now to the third breakout session of the day. So those of you in the technical track will stay here. Individuals that are participating on the physical or the general awareness, then move to the other rooms. Thank you everyone for attending today.